Hey guys, welcome to The Grey Escape. I'm Natalie Gray and I am back from hiatus. And what have I been doing? Well, I have been traveling all over the UK, recording new episodes of this show with incredible people, game changers, mind expanders, scientists, and information powerhouses. So stay tuned to this very space. But who's here today? Someone who has committed a great deal of time to sharing what he believes to be evidence that there is life after death. I'll tell you all about it right after this. Episode 22 of The Grey Escape featured filmmaker Paul Davids, writer and producer of the cult Showtime movie Roswell, starring Kyle MacLachlan and Martin Sheen. That episode was called Roswell Revealed, and it delivered exactly what it says on the can. Today's episode was also recorded that very same day in the California home of Paul Davids back in 2013, just before the release of his documentary, The Life After Death Project. The Life After Death Project is about what Paul Davids believes is evidence that he was contacted from beyond the grave by his mentor and friend, Forry Ackerman, an iconic figure from the world of movie special effects who also published a much-beloved magazine called Famous Monsters. I want to point out that the interview was originally recorded for video, so rather than my usual style of interviewing, which is a little more hands-on, for this one, I am laying low. I'd also like to point out that this episode is unexpectedly timely because, unbeknownst to me, over the last 3 years since I interviewed Paul, he's been writing a book about this experience, a book called An Atheist in Heaven, and the book just came out. In the UK, the Kindle book is even being released tomorrow. So this is unexpectedly timely. As always, there will be links to both the documentary and the book at thegreyescape.com, as well as photographs of some of the key evidence Paul is going to speak about in this episode. But in the meantime, see what you think as you hear all about the paranormal occurrences and strange incidents in Paul's own words. Here's respected filmmaker, author, and speaker, Paul Davids.
I had as one of my mentors in film and literature, Forrest J. Ackerman of Los Angeles, who was an extraordinary inspiration to me from the time that I was a boy, reading the magazine that he edited, called Famous Monsters of Filmland. It began in 1958, that magazine, and it had all the movie monsters and the secrets behind how they did the special effects in the film world before these things were more commonly known or available. But it also had an incredible sense of humor about it, because the editor, Forry Ackerman, had such an extraordinary sense of humor and a gift for puns. He loved the pun. He loved plays on words, word twists. It was his second nature. So his magazine and all the captions of the photos were filled with these things that were really very, very funny. And as kids, we just loved this. I got to know Forry. I met him first at a science fiction convention in Washington, D.C. And he told me that his magazine was going to be holding a contest for amateur filmmaking and suggested I enter it. Well, I did. I made a short, silent film when I was a young teenager. It was called Siegfried Saves Metropolis. That's a combination of two films by the German director Fritz Lang, Metropolis and Siegfried. Forry had written a little script for this for kids to film and enter, and I was a winner of an honorable mention prize in that contest, which resulted in my getting a lot of publicity in his magazine with pictures from that film and other little animated special effects films I had made with dragons and dinosaurs and that kind of thing. When I was a kid, I was fascinated by special effects. So thanks to Fari, I had kind of a following as a producer, when I was like 13 years old. And that stuck with me. I went to Princeton, have an undergraduate degree in psychology, prepared to go to medical school, took all the courses, including, organic chemistry. And I applied and I was accepted at a medical school I might have gone to, but I changed my mind at the last minute and decided to pursue my main love, which was film and animation, special effects. I came out to Los Angeles, studied at the American Film Institute, and then really got to know Fari Ackerman. Visited him many times in his home that's called the Acker Mansion. It was 18 rooms, absolutely filled with memorabilia from science fiction, fantasy, and horror films. File cabinets packed with hundreds of thousands of stills going back to the early black and white science fiction films. And he was, well, everybody called him Uncle Fari, but he was a father figure to me. It was a really strong bond. I dedicated one of the Star Wars books I wrote to him. He wrote the foreword to my first book, The Fires of Pele, Mark Twain's legendary lost journal that I wrote with my wife, Hollis. And I wrote for Fari's subsequent magazine called Monsterland. And he would come over to see me, a birthday party here, and he was the one, he and his wonderful wife, Wendane, introduced me to Ray Harryhausen, the great special effects animator who would come over from England, and I got to spend an evening and a wonderful dinner at Fari's house I will never forget. And even Joka Pal came, Mrs. George Pal, the wife of the great producer-director of films like The Time Machine, The Wonderful World of the Brothers Grimm, and he produced the original War of the Worlds. So all of these things were thrilling to me when I was a young film student, and I stayed in close touch with Fari throughout life. When I made the film The Sci-Fi Boys, I have sequences in there with Fari and many people prominent in the film business today talking about what an extraordinary influence he had on their careers in leading them into the world of imagination in film. In fact, I filmed one scene where I took Fari to the grave of George Pal. Fari had read the eulogy at George Pal's memorial at George Pal's passing, and I had him reread the eulogy and filmed it, years after George Pal had died. This was actually just a few years before Fari passed away. Fari passed away on December 4th, 2008, at around 3 minutes to midnight. It was a great loss to the world of science fiction. Those who cared deeply for him, miss him terribly. But it should be said that Fari was an atheist. More than a skeptic, he was an atheist. He would write essays on why he didn't believe in God. And he didn't believe in flying saucers being real. He didn't really believe in the paranormal or the supernatural. He felt it was great as stories that stimulate our imagination, but he was an atheist. He did not believe in life after death. But some of his close friends said to him, well, Fari, if it turns out that you're wrong, he said, if I'm wrong, if I can, I'll drop you a line. He said, of course, if I wake up to some great science fiction convention in the sky and I'm reunited with Bela Lugosi and George Pal and my dear wife Wendane and Peter Lorre and all the other stars of horror and science fiction have passed away, I'll be very busy with them for a while, but if I can find a way to let you know, he said, I will, but don't count on it. That's what he said. He didn't want a funeral, and he said he didn't want a memorial, but his caretaker closest friend to him for the last 10 years or so, Joe Moe, said, Fari, what about a tribute? How would that be, Fari? Could we have a tribute for you? Fari said, well, a tribute, that would be okay. So in March, after he passed, a couple months after he passed, Joe Moe and others worked to set up a tribute for Fari at the Egyptian Theater in Hollywood. And it was packed. Every seat in that theater was filled. And there were about 10 people who spoke at the tribute. I was one of them. John Landis spoke, Rick Baker, Guillermo del Toro, Brad Lino-Weaver, who wrote a book with him, Bill Warren, who wrote many science fiction books. It was quite a cast of people attesting to his great contribution to the field and what a loyal friend he had been to all of us. Well, there were 2 filmmakers from Canada who were there. This is covered in my film, The Life After Death Project, where you'll meet these 2 producers who had made a film about Fari Ackerman, famous monster, the Forrest J. Ackerman story. They had come in from Canada and they were going to show their film that night at the tribute. Well, they went to his crypt that day, and one of them knocked on his crypt, rapped on his crypt. And they came back to the hostel room where they were staying at. And they felt kind of awkward that they had rapped on the crypt. Fari, hello, it's us. Are you there? Kind of a silly thing to do. But when they got back, one of them wanted to post the photos that he had taken at the crypt on Facebook. And in order to do the blog the way he does it, Facebook throws up a code that you have to type in so they know it's not somebody spamming Facebook. Well, what came up on the screen was Ackerman.
Oh my goodness.
000 as the code for him to type in. It's the man's name, Forrest J. Ackerman. Spelled exactly as his name, A-C-K, with a capital A, all the other letters of the name being small. And they were flabbergasted at that. I mean, the odds of that kind of a coincidence just after they'd been to his crypt. And they said, what does this mean? Is he really dead? Because it was like he was answering back at them. And there was another computer on the bureau there that was asleep. And it wasn't even online. And a voice burst out of that computer, a little voice from an emoticon. After they said, he's not really dead. This voice said, oh my God, no way. It was a childlike voice, and they later were able to identify it as part of a little emoticon cartoon that you can find on YouTube. But they weren't logged on to YouTube, and no one had downloaded that cartoon into the hard drive. There was no reason, but it came out like a response to what they had said. They were completely spooked. And the computer that had been asleep had on it as the background for, the homepage, a photo of Fari Ackerman when he was 4.5 years old. So to have the childlike voice responding to them, it was in the spirit of that photo that was there. Now, they told me this story that weekend of the tribute, that this had happened to them. And I thought, my God, how bizarre. It seemed like the odds of that being some kind of coincidence were 1 in the millions and millions. Well, then I inadvertently and through no choice of my own became directly involved in the mystery. I left Los Angeles a day or 2 after the tribute and went to my vacation home in Santa Fe. And while I was there, one of the things I planned on doing was working on my taxes in March. So I printed out a document, I think it was 24 pages, that had all of my business meetings and business phone calls, things to look for from the previous year to see, where I could find deductions that I might not have thought of. And I printed out the document. I have actually right here, this is the original document that this happened with. I pressed the print command on the printer, and then I left and went out for an hour or 2. Was at the casino, lost a little bit of money, came back, and picked up these pages. Obviously, the ink was dry. It had been printed out, an hour or two before. I looked at it. There was nothing strange about it at all. I took these pages into the bedroom. I was alone in the house. The doors were locked. I plunked it down onto the bed and went into the bathroom, intending to crawl into bed and go over all of this as soon as I left the bathroom. When I came out of the bathroom, my eyes fell on the document, and I could see moist black ink covering some of the words that hadn't been there when I went into the bathroom. It was still moist. It was dark. And as I went closer to it and looked, I could see it was one line that was being covered by this. Now, I'm going to show you that what's left of the document now, that this has been through scientific testing. The chemists have punched holes in it. They've submitted it to all kinds of different tests to study the chemistry of the ink. This is the line that was blacked out. And you'll notice it's two different levels of opaqueness or opacity that you can still read the first two words, spoke to. But this part of it is completely blacked out. And you see the little round holes that are punched there. That was, as I said, for the chemical tests. I found this upsetting, troubling. I mean, I was completely baffled. There was no explanation for this. There was nothing that could have dripped on this document. There was no source of any moisture that could have done this. And when you look at it, it's very precise. It's 4 words. It's those specific 4 words. It's nothing else. And it's just right at the lines. I mean, it's done with precision. It suggests something very deliberate. And why 2 different levels of opaqueness? I mean, it really calls your attention to it. And the second 2 words are a name. Well, I looked at the computer file to see what the words were, and it was spoke to Joe Amode, or Joe Amodi, however you want to pronounce it. But, and that was it. This was a man who was a distributor of DVDs out of New York that I had spoken to once and suggested some business that never happened. There was never any contact with us again. It had no significance. And this really puzzled me, because if I assumed that this was done deliberately by someone unseen, something I couldn't understand, but for some specific reason, what could the reason be? It didn't make sense. I was baffled. And I stewed over this for days. First of all, the very fact that it could have happened when there was no one else in the house who could have done it.
It's very bizarre how precise it is.
Yes.
Like you'd have to almost take a tiny watercolor brush with a few hairs in it to trace over those letters. And
to do it deliberately.
Yes.
So, of course, there was the question of how was it done? What was it done with? What is the ink? This is why I felt, well, I have some scientific evidence here, something that scientists could work with, and I want some answers. And then there was the question of, is this a message? And if so, what's the message? I struggled with that for a while. And of course, I was thinking about Fari Ackerman, because I'd heard that story about the computer, Ackerman 000, that visit to the crypt, the voice that said, oh my God, no way. That had all happened right after the tribute. Well, I spoke at that tribute. So of course I'm asking myself the question, is the spirit of Forrest J. Ackerman telling me something? And if so, what? Well, as I said, Fari was a punster, and one of the things that he would always do would look for a word within a word or a name within a name and do a little word play with it to do something with humor out of it. And I had some examples in print of some old manuscripts that he had written that had his editorial style in it. And I looked at them and I tried to see, I found one thing where something was crossed out, like an editor would do, that looked a bit like this, trying to opaque something completely. But it was unclear to me whether it was done by Fari or his publisher. And I thought the person that might know this would be Joe Moe, who had organized the tribute. And I put in a call to Joe to ask him, did he have any other examples of Fari's editing style and all that? But before I could even tell him that I had a question to ask, he took over the conversation. He said, Paul, you're not going to believe this, but something, really weird happened to me after the tribute. He said, I know Fari didn't believe in life after death, and he said, I don't either, really. I'm a skeptic. He said, but I had a dream that seemed like much more than a dream. It was so real it didn't seem like a dream at all. It was just before I woke up. I saw Fari come into my room. I was asleep at the time. It was right before awakening. I see Fari's smiling face. He had a mischievous look on his face, and he said, "Hi, pal." And Joe said, in this lucid dream or whatever it was, because he said it seemed completely real. I said, Fari, the tribute. Did you see the tribute? What did you think? And he said, Fari responded to him, as he would with his sarcastic sense of humor, "Well, it was fair." And then he breaks into a big smile and he says, "No, pal," he says, "that was the ninth wonder of the world." Well, we all think of the seven wonders of the world, the seven natural wonders of the world. But for Fari, the eighth wonder of the world was always King Kong. If you saw the movie King Kong, it was up there in lights. King Kong, the eighth wonder of the world. So his tribute couldn't have been the eighth wonder. It had to be the ninth wonder. And Joe marveled at the fact that this is what Fari said to him in this dream. Joe didn't think that he would think of that himself. It's something that Fari would have said. And then he woke up, he opened his eyes, and he said everything looked exactly the same as he was seeing it before, except no Fari. Fari wasn't there. The room was the same. And Joe said, was I dreaming? And I went into shock. At that moment, I suddenly realized what was going on with this black ink. Spoke to Joe Amodi. Well, the name within a name, the pun the game he would always play of the name within a name. He found Joe Moe's name is in that name. Spoke to Joe Moe. I'm being told he spoke to Joe Moe. So was this a message was this the purpose of it, to tell me that Joe wasn't just dreaming, that he really spoke to him? And he somehow drops by to tell me, by the way, spoke to Joe Moe. I'm still here. I'm on the other side. I was flabbergasted when this thought hit me, because intuitively it made so much sense. I mean, it seemed, of course, impossible. But it's impossible for writing to appear on a document when nobody's there. I went through some of the memorabilia that I had from Fari. This is a famous Monsters magazine from, way back when, that I had asked him to autograph for me. And this in itself is really strange. Look at what he wrote. It says, Fari says, "Hooray for Harryhausen." Now he's doing it again there with the pun of the word within the name, because the man's name is Ray Harryhausen. So the name Ray is in the word hooray. Again, he's found a name within a word. It's what he does. Hooray for Harryhausen and Paul Davids. And I was in shock when I noticed what was right below it under Fang Mail. It says, "The invisible ink man strikes again." What? The invisible ink man strikes again. I mean, this was done a year or two before he passed away, a year before, this ink incident. But it seemed to suggest exactly what happened. An invisible ink man came by and left me a message. Strange. Okay, strange. I don't know. You can't explain any of it. The skeptics say, "Oh, it's coincidence. Oh, you're reading into it. Oh, you knew him and you missed him, so you manufactured this in your mind." I don't see it that way. And the fact that I had evidence in the form of that ink gave me a path to take. I got permission from the chairman of the chemistry department of Indiana University, Purdue University, who said that he would research the ink in his lab. He's a world-class expert in inks. He's studied all kinds of pigments and inks and paints and solvents for inks. So he said, FedEx me the document and I'll study it. And I said, with all due respect, I will not FedEx this document. This document will not leave my hands. I will not take a chance on this disappearing by any means, because then we'd have no way to continue. I will get on a plane and I will hand deliver it to you. And I'll bring my camera. I want to film what you're going to do in the lab. And that's how it started. We filmed. And he was perplexed by the answers, the things that were happening, by results he was getting. You know, there was no sign of any paintbrush. There was no, you mentioned, you know, it was like almost like a little watercolor brush. There was no hairs, no trace or sign of any way in which it could have happened. And there were questions about the chemistry of the ink that he wanted backed up by another university. But while we were in his lab, there was a bank of computers. Well, there were several computers. They were asleep. And one of them just woke up by itself at a strange moment. And it was, when it woke up, it was locked into a program that they thought that they had turned off. So the scientists that were there were surprised by that. They thought, that's a little odd. They sent me to Dr. John Allison of the College of New Jersey. I took the document to him. It already had a couple of holes punched into it. He had to punch a couple more. And he really took this to heart as a project to study and to get his classes involved with. And he continued studying it actually for a couple of years. And in my film, if you have the DVD, you'll see in the bonus features, he gives a lengthy conclusion, discussion as to why this is so impossible, why they can't reproduce it. They can't explain how it could be done. They said if I had wanted to do something like this, I couldn't have done it even if I had tried. And they can explain the why of that. And while I was filming him at his home, before we went to the lab, one of the days he was showing me his efforts to reproduce the ink blot, the document. He couldn't make it look right. And over his shoulder in the background was a clock that suddenly chimed. And his face just went white, like in shock that the clock chimed, because he said, you know, that clock, he said the clock hadn't worked in years. And he's told me that in the couple of years since that happened, the clock never chimed again. Not only that, but those pages he wanted to show me of his attempts to reduplicate the ink blot. He said before he went to pick me up at the hotel and take me to the lab, he put them on a chair in the dining room, tucked them under his briefcase, went up to wash up, and then to come down for breakfast. And when he came downstairs, those pages he had tucked under the briefcase were scattered all over the floor in the dining room, scattered for many feet out from the chair. And there was no way in which you could explain it, because there were no open windows, there was no air conditioning on, there were no fans, there was nothing that could have created a wind that would have, you know, blown them around. And he also showed that, you know, he said, okay, so what if I had put it down close to the edge of the chair and it fell? So he tries that, and of course the papers, they just fall right there at the foot of the chair. They're not spread out across the dining room. So he thought that was really odd. Later I found out that the Acker Mansion, where Fari Ackerman lived for so many years, it had been remodeled. It had tenants in it now, and they said the house was haunted. And one of them's a singer, and she would practice her music, putting the pages on a music stand at a place right by where he used to have his office, at the foot of the stairs, going down to the lower floor. And she said it happened on many occasions that she would step out of the room to, you know, get a glass of wine, get a Coke, make a phone call, come back, and the pages were scattered all across the floor. Just like happened in New Jersey. And no way you could see that it would have happened, because there's nothing blowing. One night, a male tenant there, he was awakened, and he was downstairs, the same part of the house where Fari had had his office. And he saw a dark shadow of a man moving across a wall, and sort of disappearing, like going into the bathroom downstairs. He said there was nobody there. You could distinctly make out the shadow moving across the wall, and he said he went over to the bathroom, wondering, was somebody else in this house here? There was no one in that room. There was no one there. So, again, something that we would call paranormal. Natalie, it's kept happening again and again and again for 3 years.
Wow.
The strange incidents. I had a mask in the house in Santa Fe that we measured with ELF, electromagnetic field reader, EMF reader. It had no metal parts, no reason to be giving off some EMF signals, but it did. And it was another part of the weird equation. The owner of that mask, who had loaned it to me, had wanted to hunt up his photos of when that mask had been acquired in Africa at a native dance in Zimbabwe. He said he cherished those pictures. He knew right where they were. He guarded them. They were right with all of his slide trays. And he went to look for them. And of all of his slide trays, that was the only one that just the empty plastic tray was there and all the slides were missing. They had vanished. And again, no explanation. He said no one ever touched those valuable family slides except for him. So he couldn't show me the original Dance of the Mask anymore. So this seemed to have been a mask from Africa. It was the kind of thing Fari certainly would have noticed. He was a collector of all kinds of masks. And one day in this house, there's a mask on the wall here, Wishol mask, bead mask. Was having a party here and told a joke. And everybody started laughing at the joke. It was kind of off-color joke. I had turned a comment that somebody made into this funny remark. And the mask here just leaped off the wall. Just leaped off the wall and went several feet through the air and landed at my feet.
Like it was showing it like the joke.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep. And there were 5 witnesses. They all saw it. My wife saw it. Rebecca Del Rio, the famous singer from Mulholland Drive, she was here. She saw it. Her husband saw it. There were a couple of other people. It was a spooky moment. And just to show you the repeating pattern, how these things that seem like they're messages keep coming up. I wrote an article about all of this for Fate magazine. It was published in this issue of Fate magazine. The main article was about the art of Frank R. Paul from the pulp science fiction days. Well, Fari Ackerman was a collector of Frank R. Paul paintings, great admirer of him, supporter of him. And so the publisher of Fate said, how about writing an article about your experiences with Fari? She'd heard about that for the Frank R. Paul issue. Well, I did. I wrote this article. It's The Strange Case of Forrest J. Ackerman. And the publisher told me that this went through proofreading by like 4 people. 4 people before it went to press. She cannot explain why this has a massive proofreading, typographical error anomaly here on the first page of the article, where I'm talking about the fact that there was a painting made 4 years before Fari died that had a clock in the background that predicted the exact time of his death. And I'm talking about that, but all of a sudden, right where the artist is being named, and it suddenly says, the blackout, in 2 levels of opacity of 4 words in my document. Blacked out words are, spoke to Joe Amodi. And then it repeats, the blackout, in 2 levels of opacity of 4 words in my document. Blacked out words are Joe Amodi. And then it goes on with what I had written. How is it that in this article suddenly appears, after 4 people have proofread it, the double reference to the ink blot in my document of the 2 levels of blackness in the document? It makes no sense. It makes no sense.
What is the most recent thing that's happened in this bizarre series of events?
Okay, let me tell you a few of them, if if I may, a couple that happened after the movie was finished. I mentioned the painting of the clock, 3 minutes to midnight. This was done of Fari in 2004, 4 years before he died. So it's established that the hands of a clock at 3 minutes to 12 is of significance related to Fari. Okay, first, his former assistant from almost 40 years ago had gotten in touch with me that he had a lot of memorabilia he wanted to. He thought I should have it. And memorabilia from Fari. And he sent it to me. And inside was a Wizard of Oz watch that was set at 3 minutes to midnight, 3 minutes to 12, the hands of the clock. And I asked the assistant, who now lived in near Carlsbad Caverns, did you know what time Fari died? Did you set? No, he didn't know. He had no idea what time Fari died. That watch just happened to be set there. Then, very recently, I went to the University of Arizona to Dr. Gary Schwartz, who has researched life after death for over 15 years, mainly using extraordinary mediums that he's culled from around the world, but also now using technology to attempt to contact spirits. I was with Fari, and we were discussing again these strange circumstances that had happened. And while we're talking, suddenly an alarm clock rang. And we couldn't even tell where the alarm clock was at first. And Gary looks around, and then he realizes that there's a little alarm clock, a travel alarm clock, buried down in his seat. You know, that like he's sitting on it. And he pulls it out, it's still ringing. And he says, I'll be damned, I didn't know this thing was there. He said, I never use it. And we look at it, the hands of the clock are exactly 3 minutes to 12.
Wow.
It rings at 3 minutes to 12. He did not set the alarm. He never used it. He didn't know it was there. It's never rung again. But at 3 minutes to, 12, the hands of the clock look like they're exactly at the time that Fari died.
Wow.
And we're talking about him, and that happens.
And this wasn't the actual time, the 3 minutes to 12.
It was 3 minutes to 12. It actually rang. It was noon. It was noon.
Significant time.
Yes,
right.
It was noon, and it went off at that time. I want to tell you another. Oh my God, was this strange? There's a series of events. It was nearing Fari's birthday, a couple years after he died. And I got together with a couple of people who had known him but had never visited the crypt. One of them's named Russell Maynor. He had actually done the last professional photographic portrait of Fari Ackerman. And then there was Carrie Quinn, who had published a couple of major magazines in this genre, who was a total skeptic. Just couldn't hear of this whole idea of life after death. But he was willing to visit the crypt. Now, mind you, Fari would often sign his name 4E. The number 4 and the E. It was part of his whole word within a word play, punning, so he was 4E. And what was his whole life about? It was about effects, special effects. His magazine, Famous Monsters, brought the whole concept of movie special effects and how they were done to a whole generation that went on to become George Lucas and Steven Spielberg and Dennis Muren and Rick Baker and John Landis and massive Academy Award winners. People who've made films in this genre that have grossed billions of dollars worldwide. That was Fari's contribution. He was the Pied Piper, the father figure that brought all of these people into the world of effects. And in the business, effects is FX.
Right.
Okay. There's one more detail you need to know. I had broken my ankle, and Joe Moe had loaned me Fari's cane. And I was walking to the crypt with Fari's cane that day. And at the time I didn't know it. I discovered it later that the cane, metal cane, actually had a serial number on it that began with 084. All right, here's what happened. I'm leading the way, the other car's following me, driving up to the crypt at Glendale Forest Lawn. And there are many turnoffs you could take getting up there. If you didn't know how to go, you'd get off on the wrong road 10 times. Well, a white van pulled in front of me. Looked like maybe the kind of white van that would deliver flowers to a grave. And I noticed the license plate. And that van literally led us almost right to the crypt, to the very last turn off before the crypt, and it stopped. And I stopped the car, and the guys stopped behind me, and they got out, and I said, look at that license plate. It was 4E FX 084.
Good grief.
Good grief is right. And even Kerry O'Quinn, as soon as he saw 4E FX, he was flabbergasted.
Is 84 significant?
The 084, well, apart from the fact that that number 84 has had, and 48, many, many numerical coincidences in my life, it was the beginning of the serial number on the cane that I was walking with when I went to his crypt. I have that even still here in the house. It was Fari's cane that Joe had loaned me, 084. And we paid our respects at the crypt. We paid our respects at the crypt, and then by the time we turned around, that truck with the license plate was gone.
Were those three numbers in the serial number, 084, all three of them?
Yeah, the beginning.
Wow.
I can show it to you. You can film it.
The two would be a coincidence, but the three...
You can film it. It's real. And the spookiness of that doesn't stop there. There's another element to it. Russell Maynor, one of the people there who'd done the photographic portrait of Fari, he used to be a reader of Famous Monsters magazine when he was a kid, all the time, and he would go to the drugstore with a friend of his whose last name was Haggard. I'm trying to remember the first name. Let's say it was Bill, for the sake of argument, Bill Haggard. I'm not sure if that was it exactly. But they would always read the magazine together. Well, his friend, Mr. Haggard, now, had not paid any attention to the world of Fari Ackerman or Famous Monsters for, 25 years or more. He's grown up, he's got a profession, it's different, he's not involved in this world at all. Russell Maynor called him up to tell him about the weird incident of the grave, the license plate. You remember Fari Ackerman? Remember the magazine? Yeah, boy, that's strange. Well, soon after that, a package arrives at the home of his friend Haggard. Inside this package is that documentary made by those two Canadian filmmakers that the whole weirdness started out with when they had knocked on the crypt. It's their movie, Famous Monster, Fari Ackerman's story, being delivered to Haggard, and Russell Maynor did not send it to him. And there was no one in Haggard's life who would have sent it to him. No one who ever knew he read the magazine all those years ago, or would have even cared. No reason to suppose he would have cared. The Fari Ackerman story? Why? Russell definitely did not send it to him. They desperately wanted to see, was there a return address on the envelope? He was so sure it must have been sent to him by Russell that he had torn it open and he tossed the envelope into a trash thing that just when they were getting out there to go digging through the trash bin, they discovered it had just been picked up and the trash just gone. They could never find out. But think about that. It has stunned us, because there's nobody except the ghost of Fari Ackerman himself doing that as another one of these mischievous little hellos who would have sent this man that documentary about him. I have that documentary here now, actually. Russell gave it to me to be the custodian of it. So you have this series of never-ending incidents that keep happening that seem like it's Fari saying hello.
That is very bizarre. And so to this day, you still have no idea where the documentary was sent from.
No.
Nobody's ever come forward and given a hint or shed any more light on it. I
No.
mean, it begs the first thing that pops into my mind.
Also, it was a used one because Mr. Haggard said he didn't have to tear open the cellophane. It had been seen by someone else before.
I mean, you think of, ghosts or poltergeists as being mischievous, but one has to wonder then how far the reach is, if they can get the postal service to cooperate with them. It's quite remarkable.
Yeah. All of the chain of events that put me on this path, and many of the things I've talked about in this interview, are in the Life After Death project, dramatized. Well, I don't mean dramatized, because it's the actual people. It's a documentary. I reenacted the scene of the ink appearing on the document because obviously we had no footage of that.
Of course.
But other than that, it's all real as it happened, and filming with the scientists in their labs. The extraordinary filming with Gary Schwartz. His research is amazing on life after death and all the mediums that he has tested. And he brought 2 different mediums into this to give readings, to see. They were kept in the dark, blind, as we say. They knew nothing about who we wanted to contact, or they didn't have my name. They knew nothing, deliberately, not told. We started first with someone in Tucson, exceptional medium, psychic medium, named Catherine Yunt. And we filmed her reading, and she seemed to be conveying all these things as if they were coming really from Fari.
Wow.
You know, one of the things about Fari, Forrest J. Ackerman, he insisted no period after the J. And it stood for James. But there was a photo of him when he was very young with a different middle name, Forrest Clark Ackerman. So what was his middle name? I had the actual birth certificate and was able to verify that. One of the things the medium says when she's saying, you want to know if you're in touch with him, he says, one of the ways you'll know him is about his middle name. She said, it's some controversy about his middle name, and you're going to know what he's talking about. Well, it just hit it right on. How many people would you say that about? And time and time and time and again, she seemed to be conveying things that related to him. Then another psychic, this was almost a year later, was consulted, someone from Israel who came to Tucson to do research with Dr. Schwartz. And her name is Orit Ish Yemeni Tomer. Call her Orit. And her psychic reading was just incredible. She talked about this funny magazine that he published, that he collected, she said, all kinds of little strange dolls. She didn't have the English word monsters, you know. He collected all these little movie props of the, you know, the monsters. They were all over his house.
These ladies had no idea remotely of who they were?
No idea, not even remotely. When they sat down for the first time, they got to hear his first name. Just that I'm there. They weren't told my name. This man sitting here would like to know if you can hear something, some message from Forrest. And each reading was about an hour and wove a path through many, many details, most of which related to his life.
In the research for the film, have you met other people who've had other similarly extraordinary situations and events happen in their lives?
That's a very good question. Yes, I've met many other people who've had similar things. Strange things happen with deceased people they were close to, including some cases where there was very clear evidence that also could be tested, but of a different kind. And I will say that my own father-in-law, Frank, passed away as I was finishing this film. It was sudden. We discovered he had very serious and advanced pancreatic cancer. And the day that he passed away, really strange things happened too. He lived in a home where you know, you have caregivers and that kind of thing. Assisted living. And there was a fellow there who was very close to, was the driver, that would take the residents out on field trips and things. Well, they used to share every confidence. They were really close pals. And this fellow at the home went into the room that my father-in-law had lived in. It was a few hours after he died. The body had already been removed. And he came in, he called out, he said, Frank, you know, it's me, I just came here to say goodbye. Just came here to say farewell. And he said at that moment, there was a vase, or sort of it was a vase-like object that you might put candy in, let's say, for example, on top of the refrigerator. not at the edge of the refrigerator where it would fall off, but in the center of the top of the refrigerator. And he said at that moment, the damn thing popped off the top of the refrigerator. It was made of glass. It hit the ground, didn't break. Reminiscent of when my mask, popped off the wall. And he received 2 phone calls that both said they were from Frank. Frank's full name showing up on his phone. First, his personal phone. He answers it, Frank, hello, hello, hello. Nobody there. And then a minute or two later, his corporate phone rings. Also says, it's from my father-in-law. Nobody there. How did this happen? I mean, it's just mind-boggling.
Right.
So, what I say, I don't have the answers. Got a lot of questions, got a lot of things that have happened that cannot be explained. And people have tried to explain, like the ink. No. So, to those who have made up their minds already and their minds are closed, whether it's that they're an atheist or they just don't believe there would be any life after death because they think we're just a chemical system that, we're like an old computer that's worn out, you throw it away. It's not giving any more information after it's done. And I thought like that for most of my life, too. But in order to think that way, you have to completely block out all of this evidence that's in my film, The Life After Death Project, and other similar evidence you'll find in other places. Dr. Eben Alexander, a neurosurgeon, has written an extraordinary book, I think it might be a bestseller now, called Proof of Heaven, about his near-death experience. In my film, I have Daniel Brinkley discuss his near-death experience. He was struck by lightning. He was, I guess you would say, deceased because he had no EKG. There were no brain waves, no breathing, no pulse. And I think that was about 35 minutes. And then he came back to life. And he said during that 35 minutes, he existed, and he existed someplace else. And it was extraordinary. And it was like leaving this body and waking up to a new and larger reality. It's like we can be caught in the middle of a dream, we're asleep, and then we wake up and the dream's over. And we say, well, it was just a dream. And these men say that the sensation of these near-death experiences, it resembles that at the next level. Like, you leave this reality behind. You leave your body behind as a lump of clay that's going to decay, but it's like you've woken up from a dream. So to the skeptics, and there are some in my film too, including Dr. Michael Shermer, who's written some excellent books, Why People Believe Weird Things and Science Friction, or not science fiction, but science friction are 2 of his books. And he publishes Skeptic magazine. And we have to examine everything with a skeptical mind, because we don't want to believe the wrong thing. We don't want to be fooled. We don't want to live in error. But science has lived in error again and again and again and again. When Pasteur came up with the theory that germs cause disease, science laughed at him. They didn't believe it. What, little microorganisms in the body? Are you crazy? Are you mad? No. You want a patient to heal, you have to bleed them, because disease is caused by bad blood. That's what they believed. Or they believed that aviation was impossible. A machine, a heavy machine you think is going to go up in the air? Impossible. Rocketry. The New York Times, I think it was in the 1920s, published, today we'd call it, I guess, an op-ed piece, why rocketry was in outer space was impossible. Why? Because you'd have this blast coming out of the back of a rocket ship, but there's nothing for it to push against. So the rocket wouldn't go anywhere. These are things that science believed, and science was wrong. And science is acting as though it's blind to this evidence about life after death. It is being ignored. It is being debunked. This is wrong. That is my message. That is the purpose of my film, The Life After Death Project. Take another look.
Does the wording, everything is an illusion, mean anything to you?
Everything is an illusion.
Yes.
Does that mean anything to me? It was a song I always sang when I was a kid. Row, row, row your boat merrily down the stream. You know, merrily, 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 merrily. Life is but a dream. And the Hindus have a belief that all is Maya, and that's their word for illusion. That we live, our consciousness lives within a grand illusion that is a creation of what? Our mind, the universe, but that there are other realities. The Hindus believe you ascend to the ultimate reality, nirvana, the total awakening. So these kinds of beliefs have been embedded in human culture forever. And we live in a world where none of us has the final answers. And that's what makes the journey worth taking, I guess.
When I had my unusual experience, one of the messages that came through was everything is an illusion. It's a very key wording that I had never heard of such a theory, and have since learned that this is fundamental to lots of ancient cultures and beliefs, this sort of everything is an illusion. So I wondered what your take on it was.
Well, that maybe illusions are relative, because a dream, while you're in the middle of it, may be a complete illusion because it's not really happening. You're physically not in the places that you're dreaming about, but it sure seems real. My dreams seem real while they're happening. And you wake up and it's, just a dream. Oh, I don't have to worry about not making that train that I was going to miss in my dream 5 minutes ago, because there is no train and I don't have a ticket on it and I'm not going anywhere. So who's to say?
Who's to say?
Who's to say?
Well, your film sounds absolutely brilliant. I actually am grateful that I got to look at a little rough cut when we were at Comic-Con.
You saw, yes, you saw it unfinished.
A couple of years ago now.
You saw an unfinished version a couple of years ago.
But it was brilliant. Even the rough cut was, we just sat there with our mouths like, oh my goodness, this really happened. And it really did happen. So I'm very excited.
It really did happen.
Yeah.
And this is, I will say to my dying day, that ink blot just appeared. I had nothing to do with it.
Right.
I wasn't thinking about it, didn't expect it. It was the farthest thing from my mind. How it got there, I don't know. But the only explanation I have is that Fari Ackerman, deceased, was telling me he spoke to Jomo. And to me, that makes sense.
And he was sending the message that he'd promised, if I find out anything otherwise, I'll let you guys know.
He said, I'll drop you a line. Does that look like a line to you?
Yeah, he dropped you a line. Amazing. Well, thank you very much for sharing the insight into the inspiration and the backstory into life after death. And we're going to stay tuned. Is there a particular website we should sort of keep an eye on?
Lifeafterdeathproject.com and pauldavids.com is my website. You'll hear about it.
And of course, the late Fari Ackerman is your publicist, so he'll be alerting us somehow.
He's a good publicist.
Things will start falling off the wall, and we'll know the movie's coming up soon.
He's a very effective publicist.
Well, thanks again, Paul.
Yeah, thank you.
And best of luck with the film. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
So formal, right? Well, thank you, Paul. Thank you. Yes, I've loosened up a bit since 2013, but I do want to thank Paul Davids again for inviting me to his home to do the interview. As always, links to all the cool stuff can be found at thegreyescape.com, including Paul's documentary, The Life After Death Project, and his brand new book, An Atheist in Heaven, that describes over 100 incidents of the unusual and uncanny messages and phenomena believed to be from Fari Ackerman, complete with scientific support from contributing writers and investigators. Even at thegreyescape.com, you will find a photo of the document that Paul believes was tampered with from beyond. Next week, I'll be speaking with sound scientist John Stewart Reed, inventor of the cymoscope and a pioneer in the field of cymatics, that is, making sound visible. This is really cool stuff. You want to talk frequencies and vibrations? We get our Tesla on and we go there. In the meantime, thank you guys for listening. It's good to be back. Take care, and I'll catch you next time on The Grey Escape.